I love how Thank you, Flavia, for setting up the recording. So we are recording today's meeting. We want to be mindful to keep your information and your sensitive information about your child private. So we do ask that we hold all questions until the end in our Q&A. We will provide a length of time at the end of our presentation to answer any questions you may have regarding today's workshop. Once again, my name is Melissa Cirillo. I will say that multiple times. Feel free to ask me. I have it on the bottom of the screen as well. I am absolutely thrilled to be partnering with Case. I want to make sure that Flavia has a chance to introduce herself and that Case has a chance to introduce herself. And then I do want to go over one more statement before we get started. Is that okay with everybody? Beautiful. Passing off to Flavia.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you everyone for being here. My name is Flavia Valdez, and I'm the Senior Educational Specialist at Support for Families, and I will be the support today with the technical area. And if you have any question or comment in Spanish, I can also help you with that, and I will pass to Lee.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lee Fisher. I am the Executive Director of CASE, the Community Alliance for Special Education, and a parent of 4 SFUSD students, 3 graduates, 1 current student. All 3 of the graduates, 2 of the graduates had IEPs, and my current kiddo has an IEP.
Thank you, Lee. Just going to repeat this one more time. I'm going to ask Flavia to add it in the chat as new people are joining into our workshop. We are recording today, so we want to make sure that you're mindful of the recording. Please keep sensitive information to the end during our Q&A. We will not be recording during Q&A. I also want to name out loud that Case will be reading what is being presented on the slide deck, so please be mindful. In the name of accessibility and inclusivity, Lee will be reading the slide deck out loud as well as adding commentary. All right, take it away, Lee. Thank you for being here, everyone. It's wonderful to have you.
Thank you all for joining us for a discussion about using the IEP process to address big behaviors. Next slide, please, Flavia. We have a limited amount of time. So yes, I am going to read the slides because we think that is very, very, very important for, we think that is very important from an accessibility standpoint. And we have much more material here on the slides than I'm going to be able to read in an hour. So just so you know, we put the slides into the chat. I'll do that a couple of times throughout the night. And hopefully some of what we don't expressly cover before the Q&A session we'll continue to cover then as well. So today's agenda, introductions, we did, great, yay. We have some information about norms. We're going to talk about big behaviors. What can we do about those big behaviors? And using the IEP process to address big behaviors, advocacy best practices, and then a Q&A. Next slide, please. Okay, so today is all about big behaviors using the IEP process I mentioned before. We're not, as was mentioned before, thank you, Melissa, we're not going to talk about specific students in the recorded version. We don't want you to spill all your tea for the whole internet to see. And most of the concepts we're going to discuss are applicable for all the students that are experiencing big behaviors right now. You can also schedule a free consultation with Case or visit Support for Families. We'll talk about the Information Resource Conference that's coming up. And there's a lot of great resources available at Support for Families, from support groups to parent mentors to parent connectors to family resource specialists, you name it. There's a lot going on there. And also to we at Case and the folks here, the professionals from, well, I know that both Flavia and Melissa are educators, and when we talk about behavior, we very often involve behavioralists, registered behavior technicians. We are not them. We're giving you information from a parent's perspective here today, from an advocate's perspective. We're not therapists. We're not going to give you clinical advice. We're not attorneys, so nothing we're saying here today is legal advice either. But we can help connect you with those resources if you need any of that. So next slide, please. The one thing I didn't mention in the last slide is that the IEP process is not a one and done meeting. This is, as we like to say, this is a marathon, not a sprint. It is a long process. Wish we could give you magic answers and just bloop, 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 fix everything right now with this one presentation. That is not reality though. So our presentation norms, we're going to be kind, positive, respectful. We're going to assume best intentions. I have as much to learn from you as you have to learn from me. I'm learning from Melissa and Flavia every day. You know what? We're going to be judgment free. When a big part of assuming best intentions is recognizing that the school system that our students are being educated in right now is under-resourced. There's a lot of very well-intentioned people doing good work, and there's also a lot of shortages. And so when we have frustrations with what's happening, we tend to look at them as system problems and recognize that most people who are working in the field of special education right now, it's too hard a job to be doing unless your heart is in it. So we want to show a lot of love and respect for our allies in the work. And so this is not about blame or judgment at all. It's about how do we collaborate? How do we bring more resources in, if anything? And we have a lot to cover, so we're going to try and stay on topic, use the chat, and I will try very, very, very hard not to use acronyms. Call me on it in the chat, or Flavia or Melissa, come off mute if you don't think I'm explaining things well enough. Some of this will be kind of technical. Next slide, please. This is not an IEP workshop. We're not going to talk about a lot of the IEP basics, but Support for Families has clinics monthly. The Special Education Rights and Responsibility is a great, great resource for families. There's a lot of information in there. I'm dropping the link to that into the chat right now. Check that out. And there's a lot of other great videos on the Support for Families YouTube channel. Next slide, please. All right, moving right into understanding big behaviors. Next slide, please. If there's one key takeaway that everyone has with them after tonight, please, this is it right here. Behavior is a form of communication. When we have students, our children, our hearts outside of our bodies, who are expressing their feelings, their frustration, their everything through big behaviors, those behaviors aren't coming from a place of our kids wanting to be bad. I use air quotes when I say bad, or being defiant, especially in school where our students very often want to please, they want to do well. Those big behaviors are coming from a place of not having any other means to communicate what they're trying to tell us. Frustration, overwhelm, just so many different things. And so what we need to do as the adults in the room and the professionals in the room is figure out what need is not being met. What is it that our students are trying to communicate to us? So that is our job. And like I said, if there's one thing you take away from tonight, behavior is a form of communication. What is it our students are communicating to us with their behaviors? Next slide, please. Behaviors are very often a symptom of a problem. I love this anxiety iceberg. We used this in our school refusal presentation last month as well. What we see in the behavior is the final straw, when our kiddos couldn't hold it together anymore. And there were very often, before we got to that point, a lot of things that led up to that. And this names a lot of it here: sensory overload, learning difficulties, unfamiliar faces, friendship difficulties, and so much more. Very often what we see doesn't really represent what is happening with our kiddos. So I promised I was going to read from the slide, and I'm breaking my own rule here. But for our students who are behind in class and struggling, especially for our kiddos, by the time they get to middle school and high school, where with all those social pressures, sometimes it's more socially acceptable and more acceptable to them to act out and have a big behavior and get kicked out of class than admit to peers that they're lost, they're not keeping up, that they don't know what they think they should know. So there's a lot of things that go into behaviors. Next slide, please. So when we think about behaviors, very often the behavioralists use the ABC model: antecedent, what happens before the behavior, what do we actually observe, and then the consequence, ABC, antecedent, behavior, consequence. The consequence is what happens as a result of the behavior. Next slide, please. So again, thinking of using the school avoidance as, and this can be generalized, not just a school avoidance, but our friends at the School Avoidance Alliance named this very well. There are very often 4 functions of school refusal. This could be generalized to behaviors, like I said. One function of the behavior is to escape or stay away from objects or situations that just don't feel good. Like leaving a classroom, or maybe not leaving and eloping from a classroom, but maybe having a big behavior in a classroom that's overwhelming from a sensory standpoint. We see a lot of our middle schoolers who have sensory processing disorder really struggle with the hallways in middle school and high school because during passing period, they're so loud. The playground can be loud and a lot going on there as well. It's lunchroom, right? Yeah, sometimes not being able to keep up, like we said before. Another one of the functions could be to avoid a situation. For some of our kiddos who are fearful of social situations, they're definitely going to avoid those. Sometimes it's easier to avoid the work if you're not sure you know how to do it, right? Sometimes it's to receive some attention, and sometimes it's a tangible reward. My kiddos, when they were younger, would much rather stay home and eat popsicles in front of the TV because they were sick rather than go to school on some days. So I learned the hard way not to reward sick days with certain things. So anyway, next slide, please. I have to tell you all, one of the resources that was really a game changer for a lot of us at CASE was Ross Green's collaborative and proactive solutions approach to Dr. Ross Green has done a lot of work in preventing restraint and seclusion amongst our kids with disabilities. And I have to say, the work that he's done and his team has done is pretty transformational. Dr. Green has written a couple books. Lost at School is one of them, but he's one of the many thought partners that we use who are doing a lot of work around reframing behaviors. And so one of the tools that I just put in the chat is called the ALSUP. The ALSUP stands for the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems. And so, again, reframing, when our kids are having big behaviors, they're not being bad, they're not being defiant. They're telling us that they have an unmet need or a skill that they haven't yet mastered. And so these are some examples, and there's more. The document that I just dropped into the chat is a 6-page, beautiful document. It's such a game changer for so many of us in how we think about behavior. And part of the reason that we would really encourage everyone who's here to look at this is because not only it helps reframe a lot of these big behaviors from this bad behavior, this bad thing, to helping us look at the what behind the behavior. Why is this happening? What is the unmet need, the lagging skill, the unsolved situation here? And to read a couple of these, not all of them. Difficulty maintaining focus, difficulty thinking of the range of solutions to a problem, difficulty shifting or being flexible when the routine has changed. There's so many here that are really, really could be important reasons behind why our kiddos are struggling to stay on task and instead are exhibiting big behaviors. Next slide, please. And so the great thing about if you want to dive a lot deeper, there's a whole bunch of information on the livesinthebalance.org website. And there's a whole process that you and your school team, gen ed teacher, special day class teacher, wherever it's appropriate, maybe your case manager, your student's para. There's a lot of really great prompts and discussion questions that can lead you into better understanding the why behind some of these behaviors. So these are some really great questions to ask. For example, are there specific tasks or expectations that the student is having difficulty completing or getting started on? Are there classmates that the student is having difficulty getting along with? Are there classes or activities the student is having difficulty attending or being on time to, right? So it's like so many great ways to reframe this rather than the behavior. Let's start before the behavior at the antecedent. Next slide, please. And another thing, another resource for digging a little bit deeper that's great for us parents, understood.org is a great website. Understood has a lot of great information that is in very parent-friendly verbiage, takes a lot of the technical verbiage um, out of the what they present, and a lot of what we do, as you can see, is very technical verbiage heavy, technical jargon heavy. So why we love Understood is it really breaks things down very simply. It's a great place for us when we're just starting in our journey. Understood.org is a great place to start. And if you're trying to dig in and understand what is happening, for the example here, like my kiddo's telling me they don't want to go to school, or you're getting those reports, hey, your teacher said you had this big behavior at school. There's some really great prompts here for you as a parent to be able to have a conversation with your kiddo. And maybe if we're talking about a speaking student, obviously, not all of our students are able to verbally communicate with us what it is that their frustration and their struggle is. But for those who can, these are some good prompts you might consider. Next slide, please. And I put that into the chat as well. Okay. Y'all, when I saw this Bill of Rights, and this is part of the 6-page document here, this Bill of Rights for kids with concerning behaviors, when I read this for the first time, I felt like someone finally saw me and saw my kid and saw his struggles. And this just felt so validating to have things framed in this way. Um, and I think this is really a reminder to me for our students with disabilities. And we use the term disabilities, not special needs, because for us at CASE, our students with IEPs, there's nothing about their need to access their education that's special. Nothing about that is special. Our students have every right to be in the classroom they're in, to be in the school setting they're in. They have as much right to receive an education as any other student in that building. So when we walk into an IEP meeting or when we walk into school, we're not asking for anything special. We're asking for the school to do their job, to educate our children alongside their non-disabled peers. That is their right. And it is our right as parents to be able to participate in the process. That is really, really important for us to understand. And so this Bill of Rights was really very affirming for me to read. And it also set some expectations for me as well. Kids with concerning behaviors, for example, have the right, I'll read number 2, to have caregivers understand that concerning behavior is no less a form of developmental delay than delays in reading, writing, arithmetic, and is deserving of the same compassion as is applied to these other cognitive delays. A kid with big behaviors, number 3, has the right to not be characterized as bratty, spoiled, manipulative, attention-seeking, coercive, limit testing, controlling, or unmotivated. Those are blamey and shamey ways of approaching this, and we come at it from a place of curiosity. And as adults, rather than negatively label a student as that, we have the affirmative obligation to do more and to learn more and really dig in. So I would highly, highly encourage you, especially those of you who are English speakers and English readers here, to pull that out of the chat and take a closer look at it. And I will I will look for the Spanish version. And before we send out the information to our attendees, Flavia, I'll find the Spanish version of that as well, because that is not linked in the chat. Next slide, please. But this Bill of Rights that has 10 items on it. And there's a couple here that I really, really wanted to point out. The number 8, to have the kids with concerning behaviors have the right to have adults in their life who are aware of the damage caused by physical intervention and are knowledgeable about and proficient in solving problems. That's our job. We have to understand how to solve problems. And 10, I think, especially for those of us who have kids who are getting a little older. Like I said, 3 of my students have graduated from high school. They're all over the age of 18 now. They're all legally adults. And so they're out there in the world, living their lives, in jobs or in college. And so it was a lot of work to build skills for some of them to launch them. But hey, it's their right to live independent, autonomous lives. And so for number 10, I think this is important for all of us to understand, is that every kid has the right to have adults understand that blind obedience to authority is dangerous, and that life in the real world requires expressing one's concerns, listening to the concerns of others, and working towards mutually satisfactory solutions. I mean, any of us who work, in any kind of environment with any kind of peer, that's our daily job, right? Everyone deserves that. So next slide, please.
Lee, I just want to
Yes.
give you a time check. I want to let you know that it's at 6:29.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All
And
right.
I'll remind you at 7, just so you know, okay?
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Anytime. All right. That was a perfect pause. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. This is a lot of links here. And the whole reason for this slide, and I will put all of this information into the chat. But these slides here, or these links that are on these bullet points here, I just want you all to know, I'm not just the one here sitting here telling you, you have rights. It has been found that students with disabilities have been so over-disciplined that the federal government stepped in and wrote additional guidance to school districts back in 2022 to interrupt that pattern and say, whoa, guys, let's take a pause. Let's look at the laws we have, and let's clarify some of those laws to make sure that you are doing what you need to educate students with disabilities and not punishing them and disciplining them for things that are happening because of their disability. So if you really want to dig deeper, there is so much great information in all of these to talk about a student's rights when it comes to behaviors. And we'll touch on some of it in the next couple of slides. And part of the reason that I put this out here is because our friends at Support for Families, us at CASE, the ombuds person at SFUSD, there's a lot of folks who are very well versed in this technical information and are available to provide additional guidance above and beyond this 1-hour workshop. Next slide, please. But one of the things that really stood out to me, and just if I could distill all these very technical hundreds of pages of documents down into one thing, it was this quote that stood out to me. The department is concerned that misapplying, or in some cases not applying, the provisions found in the IDEA, that's the federal law that where IEPs come from, including the discipline provisions, has contributed to inappropriate exclusion, particularly for children of color with disabilities, and has resulted in denying access to critical educational opportunities. So all these documents here provide guidance to our school districts to fix it. So we'll dive into some more of what that means here over the next couple slides. So next slide, please. And why is this important? This one statistic for me was so mind-blowing. 11,205,797 school days were missed by students in the school year 2017-2018 due to out-of-school suspensions. 11 million days. Whew, that's a lot of days that our kids missed. Next slide, please. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to fix it? All right, so next slide, please. So like I said before, this isn't an IEP workshop, and there are a lot of great workshops that are available to talk about the IEP process and so much more at the Information Resource Conference. There's exhibitor fairs, all kinds of great stuff. Join us on March 22nd, please. supportforfamilies.org/IRC. Ha! Flavia just put it in the chat too. Great minds think alike. Next slide, please.
Oh, do you mind if I jump in right here really quickly and take 2 more minutes?
Go for it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Lee, I want to appreciate this slide and thank you for adding this. To add on to what Lee was talking about, we will have over 30 workshops focused in special education, parent and student rights, and more. We want to help. We have workshops about self-advocacy too. We also will be having an exhibitor fair with roughly over 60 agencies that will be tabling at the event so you can get additional information. If you have a child who has an IEP and is enrolled in SF School District, you should be seeing a colorful flyer in your child's backpack. If for some reason that flyer hasn't made it home, feel free to ask your teacher or your case manager on site. They have a stack of flyers at the school, but both Lee shows it on the screen, Flavia and I have posted in the chat. We are sharing the direct link for the website for you to learn more. And spoiler alert, you might hear a robocall, if not have already heard a robocall with my voice on it, reminding you about IRC. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much, Lee, for this extra time and letting me jump in.
Anytime. Gave me a chance to chug some water, so that was a win-win. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we use the IEP process to address big behaviors? That's the reason why everyone's here, right? So first of all, understanding a couple key terms. And again, if you go to any of the Know Your Rights workshops, or you come to any of, we cover this in more detail. But if you have a student with an IEP, that IEP is governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And there are 3 very, very key concepts that you should understand. The first is child find. And that means a school must find and evaluate students suspected of having disabilities at no cost to the parents in the entire geographic boundary of the school district. So for San Francisco Unified, that's the entire city and county of San Francisco. So what that means is if you're like, you know what, I think maybe my kid, some of these big behaviors that we're seeing at school might be because, maybe they're frustrated about reading because they have dyslexia that we haven't figured out yet. I would like you to do assessments on that. Or we know that my kiddo has ADHD. Our doctor just gave us that diagnosis. And they said that we should come do an assessment with the district to get an IEP so that we can get supports to address that ADHD. Well, the district then has to honor that request and do the assessments. That's called child find. That's the child find mandate. And so similarly, if a student has big behaviors and already has an IEP, and maybe we need to do some more assessments, maybe we need to do a functional behavior assessment. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that in a few minutes. But if we think there's more going on that the district has not identified, well, then it is their obligation to try and figure it out, to do more assessments or whatever it is that's going to lead us to figuring out what is going on. Educational eligibility is different than medical eligibility, though. Our school psychologists they're not going to diagnose. You think your kid has autism? Well, the school district isn't going to diagnose your kid with autism. They might say your child meets eligibility criteria and you should go see a developmental pediatrician for an official diagnosis. They're not going to diagnose, but if there are a lot of reasons why kids get IEPs, and autism is one, just as that one specific example. So that's child find. FAPE, free and appropriate public education, must be available to all children residing in the state between the ages of 3 and 21, inclusive, so up to the student's 22nd birthday, including children with disabilities who have been suspended or expelled from school. So speaking of those suspensions, if you have a student who's having big behaviors and getting kicked out of their class and sent to the office, and you keep getting calls every day to come leave work and pick up your child from the office, well, all of a sudden that's not free to you anymore. You're having to leave work. You're losing your income. It's costing you quite a bit of money, actually. If an after-school program that works with the school district is saying, sorry, your kid can't be in this program. We don't have that's not IEP, so let's not go there. That's a whole other. Let's stick with IEPs, which are during the school day, but there's rights there as well. So that's another presentation and another workshop, so put a pin in that. But free and appropriate. Appropriate does not mean best. Appropriate and reasonable are your two favorite terms, not best. So making sure that services are provided for free so that your student can access their education, that's one of the responsibilities of the school district. Least restrictive environment. This is so critically important for so many of us. This is one of I want to really put some some stars here, like if some special effects around this. The least restrictive environment means that children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled, and this is verbiage that's taken directly with the quotes. This is directly from the language of the Ed Code. And special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So your student has the right to sit in that general education classroom alongside neurotypical kids, even if they have big behaviors. They have the right to be there as long as that's that's the level of education that's appropriate for them, right? If you have a kiddo who's doing great academically, but struggles with some big behaviors sometimes for some other reasons, then the gen ed environment is appropriate. And we have to try supplementary aids and services in that environment before we talk about pulling them out into a more restrictive environment, like a special day class or a separate school or something like that. What does that mean? Supplementary aids and services. Sometimes that's paraeducator support. Sometimes that's a sensory toolkit. Sometimes that's other accommodations. Sometimes it's a registered behavior technician. But when we hear, and we hear this a lot at CASE, that, my kid keeps getting suspended. They say that, they don't think this classroom is the right fit for him. I think he loves his peers. He's learning. It's just like there's something. Well, have we tried putting maybe like for a kid with ADHD who's constantly distracted, have we tried providing a little bit more support during those toughest times when they are most distracted? Maybe someone to help keep them on task and help them get through the work. For a kid who's having big behaviors, have we thought about maybe putting a registered behavior technician, someone who really understands how to work with these behaviors and how to prevent them from happening? Have we thought about adding a little bit extra support to help prevent those behaviors from happening, to help de-escalate our students before they escalate, to prevent them? So, and can we do that in the gen ed environment rather than pulling them out into a separate class and segregating them from their peers? So least restrictive environment is a really important concept for us to understand and really push hard for our students' rights there. So next slide, please. Now, we use this flow chart at CASE all the time. We created this. This is, and the reason why we created this and why we think this is, we put this in throughout our presentation. If you sit in an IEP meeting at a school site, with someone from the central office, a content specialist or a supervisor, very often you'll hear them say, needs drive goals, goals drive services, right? And that's just the way that the administrators, the way that the folks who do this professionally, the way they think about the IEP process, because of the way the ed code is written, is completely different than the way we as parents tend to approach the IEP process. Like for me, the first time I thought about, what services would look like in school for my kiddo was applying for the lottery for his kindergarten year. And so we were approaching the IEP process from the school where he ended up getting placed. And then started thinking, all right, what services? That's exactly the opposite of how the IEP process is designed to work. We talked about child find. So the first thing that should happen is your child should be assessed. You should get that initial assessment, the triennial assessments. There should be a lot of standardized tests that give us more information about how our child thinks, how they're performing academically, adaptively, all kinds of different ways. And so we take that and then we identify what are our students' areas of need. Sometimes we look at behaviors and test scores and class observations, and we have doctor's notes and things like that help us figure out what is a student's area of need. And then we take those area of need and we write goals in those area of need. For my kiddo with ADHD who had a really hard time staying on task because he was so distractible, we had a goal about staying on task, getting his work done, work completion, because that was an area of need for him. He needed help staying on task. So needs drive goals. And then once we understand the goals, once we've got SMART goals, very specific and measurable goals written, then we talk about services. Okay, if he's going to stay on task, what support do we need to put in place to help him stay on task? So in his case, it was some extra para minutes, to be there in his tough subjects, or at the end of the day when he was already spent and all his energy was done and he didn't have the ability to focus himself, he needed help staying focused. So needs drive goals, goals drive services, and he also needed some specialized academic instruction to help keep him, to help him catch up in the areas, a little bit more individualized support to help him in some of the areas where he was a little bit behind. Needs drive goals, goals drive services. So then it's like, okay, para support, some SAI minutes, the para support, that can all be pushed in the SAI support, the specialized minutes. So it makes sense for him to stay in that general education environment rather than pull him out into a special day class, or a more restrictive setting. So that is how the administrators think about the special education process, whereas we as parents usually think, I'm applying for this school, I'm applying for that. So if we can all be talking the same language and approaching the process the same way, or at least we can understand where they're coming from with a lot of this, it really helps us ask for things in different way that can be much more effective. Next slide, please. So to that point, needs drive goals. The first part is the need, figuring out the need. We do psychoeducational evaluations for our students. We do OT assessments, speech and language assessments. But really one thing that if we've got a kiddo with big behaviors, let's look at doing a functional behavior assessment. And that is well within your rights as a parent to ask for a functional behavior assessment. And it's well within your, we'll talk about advocacy strategies later. But send an email to your case manager, to your principal, if you're seeing big behaviors and you think you need more information to effectively address them. And ask for an FBA. This is not a Know Your Rights presentation, but once you put that in writing, there's a certain timeline that then gets, starts the clock. 15 days later, within 15 days, you should get an assessment plan. Once you sign that assessment plan, that starts the clock for actually doing the assessments and calling the IEP meeting to review the assessments like the FBA. It can be, wait a minute, my kid's really struggling with handwriting this year, and that is leading to big behaviors. Can you do an occupational therapy assessment? Wait a minute, my kiddo is really struggling with their expressive language, or with their social pragmatic communication with peers. Can you please do a speech and language assessment? And so you don't even have to name the assessment. You can just name the struggle and ask your team what assessments they would recommend. That is part of the child find mandate. That's why I mentioned it earlier. So there's a lot that can go into that. Observations, interviews, rating scales. And sometimes some of the ways we identify it is through the grades, right? Or the standardized test scores. Oh my gosh, my kid is in 4th grade and their standardized test scores are well below basic. What's happening here? Let's take a closer look. So many ways we can address it. But it starts with an assessment and getting the right data. I'm a data geek, so love pounding on this a little bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's say we've got some of our assessments. Do we have all the areas of need covered that we really should think about? And especially as our kiddos get towards upper elementary school and middle school and high school, the reason that we put this slide in here is these are some real areas of struggle for our kiddos that, especially in that leap to middle school, become very, very difficult. Executive function. Can your child plan and prioritize work appropriately? Can they figure out how to get started? That's task initiation. Time management. I'm 50 years old and I still struggle with time management. Organization. Let's take a look at your students' backpack, cubby, locker. How many times do we have the frustration of sitting at the dining room table, doing homework, only 2 days later to see on parent view that hasn't been graded because it never got turned in? It's buried at the bottom of the backpack. You find it a couple days later, right? Emotional regulation, impulse control, flexible thinking. How can your child work through a change, like having a substitute teacher, having different things come up in their day? Goal setting and self-monitoring. All right, I know that my big project is due in 2 weeks. Am I staying on task and keeping those milestones together that I need to actually be able to turn that in on time? Stamina and perseverance. Do our kids have the ability to get through the day? These are some long school days for our kids. And it requires a lot of demand, mental load, sensory load. There's a lot going on in those classrooms. These are very, very high energy classrooms. They demand a lot from our students that actually pulls their attention away from the academics. So, a lot of our kids come, I had the situation with one of my kiddos. They could keep it together throughout the day. And they would just hold all their frustration in. But the minute they got home at the end of the day, they fell apart on me because I was their safe person. So that was tough to deal with some of that overwhelm, and that, but rather better me than at school. But anyway, that's the environment that a lot of our kids are working in, you know, that self-advocacy, right? This is a key area that that our kids need to learn to address to be as successful as we want them to be in the real world post their educational experience. Can they ask for help? Can they uh, can they push through? Do they have coping strategies? Can they push through frustrating things and still stay engaged in working on their material? Productive struggle is a term that our educators we don't want to make things too easy for our kids. You know, we don't want to make them too hard for our kids, but we do want them to struggle through. I mean, some of my things that I'm most proud of that to this day are the things that I really had to push through some struggle and work hard to achieve. And that's how we learn, is by struggling a little bit, figuring it out, and getting to that next level. Metacognition. Do you understand how you think? Do you have that self-awareness of how your processes work? And when you get to the point of self-advocacy, like understanding me as a person with ADHD, I'm getting to the point at 50 of understanding how my brain works and where I need to be careful to self-advocate and accommodate and ask for patience and grace from some of my colleagues. Um, and so that metacognition is really important for me in being able to be successful throughout the day. A lot of other areas that could impact how our kids are doing and that could also impact behavior, mental health, their use of technology. Are they able to access Google Classroom in the same way as their peers? Do they need assistance with that? Self-care. Can they brush their teeth? Can they tie their shoes? Can they button their buttons? Can they open and close their backpack and lunch box and all the, can they open their wrappers at lunchtime? Behavior. That's why we're here. And their social, emotional, and their social skills. How are their skills and ability to interact with peers? Next slide, please.
I'm just going to jump
Okay.
in. We're at 6:54, Lee.
Okay. And I'm going to break my rule. And Andres and I talked about this a little bit before we started as well. There's a lot in here about the next couple of slides contain a lot of information about what should be contained in an FBA and a behavior intervention plan. Functional behavior assessment, that's that assessment all about behavior that you can ask for. And then the behavior intervention plan, if the functional behavior assessment, if your team decides you as a parent and your student are fully participating members of the team, as our friend Cheryl Teese always says, you're not a guest at the IEP meeting. You are a member of the team. So if you get to the point of putting together an FBA and you all say, oh my gosh, look at all this analysis that we've done. And yeah, there's some behaviors that are impeding the student's ability to learn and participate in their learning, then we should write a behavior intervention plan. And that should have behavior goals. We'll get to goals in a minute. But there's a lot of technical details that go into these. And so we're just going to blow through the next slides. I want you to understand that if you are at this point and you need some help, you can always come to Support for Families or come to CASE and say, hey, are these the level of details I need? Should we have more? Is this, help me with the temperature check. You can come to us and Support for Families and CASE. That's our jam. We love to do that. So next slide, please. I think we're gonna, this is a really, I think most people who are here, it's been a couple minutes since I've done this, so I'm gonna drop the slides into a PDF of the slides into the chat again for anyone to be able to download if these graphics or these hyperlinks are helpful for later or this detailed information. But this is a great overview of what the FBA should be. One of the things that I think is maybe not highlighted here as much as it needs to be, when we talk about the ABCs, the antecedent, what comes before the behavior, the behavior and then the consequence. One of the things for a lot of our kids that is really, really under recognized is the impact of the environment that they are in,
Mhm.
and that is what leads very often to some big behaviors, right? For our kids with sensory processing disorder, gen ed classroom with 20 peers, especially there's a lot of stuff going on in those classrooms that can be sensorily overwhelming, right? For our kids with ADHD, oh my gosh, that can be so distracting, right? So we not just look at when we say antecedents, what comes before the behavior, we've also got to do a really thorough environmental analysis as part of that too. What are the relationships like, not just with peers, but teachers? For a lot of our kiddos, we're talking a lot now about a persistent drive for autonomy, which used to be called a pervasive demand avoidance, PDA. It's a subset of autism. And really just recognizing that a key component there for a lot of our kiddos with PDA, their behaviors almost look like trauma responses and where they come from. And for them, solid relationships with their team is such a and I'm stereotyping here. You've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with PDA, you've met one kid with PDA. So I'm overgeneralizing, but really important to recognize how critically important the role of that relationship with a trusted adult is to our students' education. Okay, so identify and
Lee,
define.
can I ask
Yeah,
one question?
yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Do you mind taking one more moment to define PDA for families who might be learning this term for the first time? I know naming that it's different in every child, but do you mind taking one more moment to explain that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So PDA, persistent drive for autonomy. I'm not sure if I can do it justice on the spot. I will try. Is a subset of autism where we have, and we very often see our students when they struggle to be able to take the perspective of others in their environment or are overwhelmed for some kind of sense, they're misreading the social cues, what maybe overwhelmed from a sensory standpoint. Their responses are very often very big, like eloping from the environment. They can be self-injurious behaviors. Um, but the way that it impacts a student with PDA, it hits their vagal nerve. There's the vagal part of your brain. This isn't a class in neuroscience, so I don't want to go too deep. But like I said before, it's more like a trauma response. Our students go into either fight, flight, or freeze. So, like I said before, elopement, or I think a lot of our kids who were considered to have oppositional defiance disorder were probably PDA, because they just get stuck and they get combative, and like it is how it's gonna be, and you're not gonna move me off of this. To be like very stubborn, or just freeze, completely shut down. So those are some of the stereotypical classic behaviors that we see, and it's not coming from a place of wanting to be defiant. It's coming from, like a complete overwhelm. Their body is flooded through that vagal system. And so you have to approach it in a completely, like, there's no number of reward charts, or promises of ice cream after school, or whatever it is that we tend to bribe students with, sometimes, or reward, depending on how you want to look at it. In that moment, um, when you've got a kiddo that's in that space, once they've escalated that far, you just have to ride the wave. So I don't know, Melissa, did that help? Did that answer the question?
It was perfect. Thank you so much. I just wanted to provide families a little bit more clarity on that. And just for validation, Jackie also wrote into the chat, thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. And one of the things, there's a lot of new research about PDA. PDA is just starting to get recognized. Yeah, not pathological demand avoidance, persistent drive for autonomy. Because it's not that the student is trying to avoid something. Uh, it's just where their brain is in that, like I said, that trauma response, that vagal response. So, so one of the things that we're finding, and that a lot of the experts are telling us, is that the traditional FBA very often doesn't provide us the information that we need to actually develop the appropriate BIP. If you're looking at antecedent behavior consequence, like so many of our, and this isn't true for every FBA, and there's a lot of folks who are very wary of applied behavior analysis. We'll get into some of that here in a minute. The autism community, there's a whole lot of when you talk about ABA, you get people into their big feels, because when we talk about an FBA or a BIP, we've got to make sure that what we're actually measuring and then the recommendations that we're making after are really addressing the root causes. That's part of why I mentioned so much of what I did at the beginning. Like I said, an FBA for a kid with PDA that gives you the recommendations of sticker charts or reward charts or extrinsic rewards, very likely is not only not going to help, but for some of our kids, like for our kids with ADHD, like me, I can theoretically tell you all the things that I need to do when I'm in my ADHD brain, which frankly only makes me feel worse when I can't do it, right? So, like a reward chart that I look at the end of the day and like, you know what? I didn't get to any of that, that doesn't help. In fact, it makes me feel worse when my behaviors weren't coming from a place of something that I could necessarily control in that moment. They were coming from my impulsivity. Instead of a behavior reward chart as an incentive, what I probably needed was my to-do list or my planner or my calendar, so that I had the tools to actually get the job done. Or in some case, I have a partner at Case who I can call and say, I need some accountability time. Can we just jump on a Google Meet? You do your work, I'll do my work, but I really just need someone to hold me accountable right now because I'm spinning. And so I've learned that's my self-advocacy strategy, to sometimes ask for help. That to me is a lot more effective than a reward chart. So making sure that we're really getting to those, we're addressing the areas of need in ways that are going to be effective is so key. Okay. And there's a question in the chat. So what do we do if the FBA doesn't address PDA or create the BIP? Well, an FBA should create a BIP.
Exactly.
So we haven't talked at all about, this isn't a Know Your Rights workshop, so we haven't talked about our procedural safeguards. But with any assessment, if you disagree with the results, or question the methodology, you have the right to ask for an independent educational evaluation, an IEE, at district expense. So there are independent FBA providers out there that you could turn to. I would just, especially if your concern is PDA, we could do a whole separate workshop on PDA. So if your concern is PDA, make sure that you find an assessor who understands PDA, because that's, yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I want to give time because I think that this question has a lot of value in it, through the lens of just the FBA creating, and they wrote a clarification, the right BIP. So I do want to give us a little time at the end to talk about this in more depth. Lee,
Yes.
are you ready to move to the next slide?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Are
Um,
you okay if I'm unmuted during this time because I love
I
talking about
appreciate it.
this.
It's
Okay,
and
perfect.
yeah, and especially and knowing that this is being recorded and could end and will end up on the YouTube channel. Anyone watching it later won't be seeing the questions in the chat. So where you're reading those to get included where appropriate, I appreciate that as well.
Thank you.
I mentioned before we're not going to read about so FBA should, if we find behaviors that are concerning and we feel like we should address because they are interrupting our child's educational benefit, then we absolutely should write a strong behavior intervention plan. And so to that question about if the FBA doesn't get us to the right BIP, then this is where I would say bring in the right information. You are, as a parent, and especially those of us who have kiddos with one of my kiddos has a condition called Lopez Gomez Hernandez syndrome. I have not met anyone else in his school district that has ever heard of that. So there are times when you're part of the rare disease community, or your kiddo has something very unique. You might have to bring that additional information. Frankly, that's why so many of us who are advocates have gotten into this realm, is because we have had to spend so much time educating ourselves and other members of it. We end up being the conduit between the doctors and the specialists and the researcher. And that summer trip we took out to the either Minnesota or Boston or Baltimore, and all that information we bring back, no one else on the kids team has that. So absolutely bring that specialized information in. Absolutely take your place on the team and name what it is that your kid needs. And the district has an obligation to take that into consideration because you are a fully functioning, fully participating member of the team.
Absolutely. And to add to what Lee is saying, I want to empower families to come to the table with the information through the format and through the lens that the school and the behavior of the BTs are using as well. So circling back, I always love just calling it the ABC format. I'm seeing this behavior at home, and this was the consequence. The consequence could be negative or positive that occurred after the behavior happened. For instance, refusal to eat vegetables so they were able to get their dessert first, right? That was the consequence. But what was the environment before they were not able to eat the vegetables? Maybe I had loud music blaring at dinner time, or maybe the television was on. So really taking that lens of when you're looking at home, I want you to come to these IEP meetings equipped with the same language that is being presented to you. Lee, I do know that you have additional resources about the ABC format, so that will be shared at the end to families too.
Yes. And let's move on to the next slide,
Thank
because
you.
one more slide, please. One more slide, please. Like I said, there's a lot of technical information. I mean, when I found this graphic on the Florida PBIS project, I'm like, this names it. This really names it. Like, I would say, keep this graphic with you. This is exactly what we're trying to do with this process. So to answer the question about what if the BIP doesn't get us to what we want, these are the questions I would ask.
Mhm.
Does the behavior plan help us prevent the problem behavior? Does it teach the student an acceptable replacement behavior? Does it reinforce the use of that more appropriate behavior? And does it minimize the reward they were getting for the problem behavior? These are the four things that a solid BIP will address. And this is an individualized education plan. So it shouldn't just be, well, here's how we do it. And here's what we put into a behavior intervention plan. And here's the services that we can provide. This should really be individualized for the need of the student. Next slide, please. Okay. Um, so if you go back to that flow chart, needs drive goals, goals drive services, a functional behavior assessment should get us to a behavior intervention plan. All behavior intervention plans are supposed to have goals. And so um, make sure, like, so this is where we really got to identify what is behind the behavior,
Mhm.
right? Um, and if we've got areas where the kiddo is showing us their frustration with their big behaviors because they're 2 grade levels behind and they're not keeping up with their peers, well then darn it, let's write a goal for that too. And not just blame the behaviors on the kiddo not being able to sit still and be quiet and be compliant. That's not what we want. Um, um, One of the things that I want to be careful about when we write goals, we want to make sure that we're not writing goals that are anti coping skills and
Mhm.
like, for example, I've seen goals in IEPs for kids with autism
Mhm.
that are labeled as pro-social. Like the student will reduce their stimming behaviors. The
Mhm.
student will reduce their squawking behaviors. Wait a minute. Why is the student stimming? Why are they squawking? If this is their coping mechanism that they're using to keep themselves regulated in a classroom so that they don't have a much bigger behavior like elopement, why would we take that strategy away from them? If a student is squawking, as a way of showing joy and excitement in a classroom, and if that's their method of communication, um, why on earth will we not let them share that joy? So we're really like, if a goal looks like it's trying to make your child compliant with the neurotypical environment, but that actually is dulling their light, make sure we counsel away from those kind of goals. Those are wildly inappropriate. They are very ableist,
Mhm.
and not appropriate at all. Okay. Um, Next slide, because we'll get into some of this in the. We do a whole separate workshop on goals, by the way. We're actually, and at the IRC, again, another plug, there's going to be whole separate presentations on understanding assessments, on writing smart IEP goals. All of that is, so please join us. But also, since you have the slides, this is a really, we love this IEP formula. It really breaks down all the different components that you should have in an IEP goal. It names you need to have, it's an IEP goal needs to be absolutely measurable. Your IEP goals are your accountability mechanism. When
Yep.
you write your goal this year, you're going to meet as a team next year and look through all the goals and say, hey, did the kiddo meet these goals? Great, yay, wonderful, good job, team. If not, the next question should be, oh, why not? Do we need to put more supports and services in place? Is there something more we need to do to help the kiddo get to where, I say kiddo, anyone under the age of 25 is a kiddo to me. I recognize that we have some young adults for whom we're writing goals as well. Um, so I should be careful with framing that. Um,
Do you mind if I
so
add something, Lee?
go for it.
Perfect. I appreciate that. I also want to remind families that every report card, there should be a progress report provided about your child's IEP goals. Notoriously, this is something that can go by, slip through the cracks, for lack of a better way of saying it. So I don't want you to be surprised by your child's progress when you attend your annual IEP meeting. You should be able to see their progress throughout the year at every report card. When you get that regular report card from the general ed teacher, they are even in an SDC, you're required to get both formats. Same in a general ed classroom, you're required to get both formats, the one that a student without IEP gets, as well as a progress report on your IEP. At every annual IEP, you will receive the opportunity to talk about your child's BIP, the Behavioral Intervention Program or Plan, excuse me, and that will give you a chance to debrief as well. But when you're getting that progress report, it is your time just like a family who doesn't have a student with an IEP, to ask about your child's progress in their IEP goals. Lee, thank you for that. I didn't want to get on a soapbox. That is something
No,
I
that's
always
important.
really want to advocate for families.
That's important. And that's actually when we do the goals workshop, we advocate not just for those progress reports, but to write in short-term objectives or benchmarks
Yes, yes.
so that align with those progress report periods. So next slide, please, because I think we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Thank
Um,
you.
Anytime. So, and the other thing that I want to point out here is that just because all of a sudden you write a goal for your student to be able, about staying on task, work completion in class, boom, does that mean the student is magically able to do all of this? Of course not. We still need to put the appropriate supports and services in place. And so this is where we can use the goal as an opportunity to be more specific. Okay, do we want to make sure that there's some, oh, my dog is being a strong self-advocate right now. Let me move him. You're going to get to hear his little tippy taps in the background now. Sorry, everyone. Um, uh, but just because you have a goal around work completion doesn't mean that your student automatically is going to do 100% of their work. We might have to write in with some prompting. That first short-term objective might be with no more than 3 prompts, student will, engage in work in no more than 3 minutes, right? I mean, like, so this is the short-term objectives are a great opportunity. And then maybe the next short-term objective could be, with no more than 1 prompt, the student will engage in less than a minute. And then maybe by the end goal, we're talking about the student, when work is presented to the student, they engage immediately, right? So
Exactly.
to Melissa's point, those short-term objectives are a great way for us to really tweak these goals a little bit more, to give ourselves some solid checkpoints throughout the year. And hopefully, as we say, to fade support. I mean, we want to start with the most amount of prompting and support and hopefully fade our students back to independence. So that could be in some cases starting to model good self-coping skills, good self-advocacy skills, maybe in a social skills group with a speech and language pathologist in the therapy setting. And then maybe by the end, we want that student to be able to ask for help independently in their gen ed classroom. So there's a lot of ways that you can use the IEP process to help a student build skills. Okay.
Leah, I want to jump
Yeah.
in, and it's 7:20, 7:19 right now. And I
Mm-hmm.
do want to give us the opportunity to open up for questions.
Yep.
Because I do want to name that we have families here with interpretation services, and they will be logging off at 7:30. So I want to make
Okay.
sure that they have a chance to ask questions. Are you
Okay.
comfortable with opening it up for questions right now?
Just real quick, I would say yes. That we have the slides and I think really one of the points I wanted to make was the least restrictive environment is with supplementary aids and services, but I think we pounded on that at the beginning of the workshop. For those of you who have the handouts, there's a couple pages at the end about advocacy best practices. And so just to really, really want to make sure that everyone knows that get everything in writing. Get everything in writing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If
Well said.
the one of the things that we say in the advocacy world is if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So document. And that could even be once you get home, like after you drop your kiddo off at school, if the principal comes running up to you to have a conversation with you, it could be when you get home, just send an email. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate that you caught me in the hallway. Hey, I'm just sending you this email to make sure that I fully understood the conversation because things were a little busy at that time. I just want to make sure and check my understanding. Blah, 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 blah. Just so you memorialize the conversation. If it was a big conversation, that's a great way to document it. And so, and you can record your IEP meeting and you should, but you have to give 24 hours notice to do that. It's just good to have that. IEP meetings are there's so much going on. It's just good to have that to reflect back on if you just need to later. So definitely, we always encourage you to record. There's a lot more in there, but look at the slides. So yes, I think we absolutely need to stop for questions. So thank you for that prompt, Melissa.
Of course. Thank you so much, Lee.